Thank you for joining us for Writing Quality VISTA Assignment Descriptions, a webinar specifically for AmeriCorps VISTA project directors and sponsoring organization staff who are responsible for writing VISTA assignment descriptions. In addition, supervisors and VISTA leaders may be interested in this topic to really learn how VADs are created and also to give them a foundation for supporting members with their VAD activities. In this webinar, we'll share some strategies for writing a strong VAD that sets your members and your project up for success. And then after today's webinar, we want you to be glad about writing your VAD. I'm your host, Eric Powell, a training specialist with AmeriCorps VISTA. I'm a proud AmeriCorps alum, having served as a VISTA member in 2006 and a VISTA leader in 2008. And I'm delighted to introduce a good friend of mine and our main speaker, Ryan Fewens-Bliss. Ryan is a nonprofit consultant who is one of our national VISTA trainers. In his day job, he leads the Michigan College Access Network and serves as a local elected official on his township council. He is a proud previous AmeriCorps state and VISTA program manager, and his organization currently hosts more than 100 AmeriCorps state members and AmeriCorps VISTA program. Ryan, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Eric. Really glad to be here to talk with VISTA sponsors and supervisors about writing quality VADs today. So looking at our agenda, we'll first build a foundation and define what a VAD is. Next, we'll explain why the document is so important to our work. And then with that knowledge in hand, we'll describe how to write a quality VAD that serves multiple purposes at your project. And as we go throughout the webinar, I encourage you to participate in our engagement activities and share your ideas and thoughts. You all and your projects are making things happen in real life, in real time, and your participation and knowledge and experience definitely will help other project sponsor staff create and strengthen their VISTA assignment descriptions. Hopefully you are already at least somewhat familiar with the VISTA assignment description, or VAD, but to ensure that we're all on the same page, I'll take a moment to define exactly what a VAD is, since there's some misconceptions about it. I'll also talk about why the VAD is really important to our work.
Thank you, Ryan. That's a great segue as we want to engage our audience right off the start with a chat question. As Ryan just mentioned, there are many misconceptions about VADs, so we're asking you now to answer the question, what is a common misconception about VADs? Maybe you've heard of it, maybe you've had your own misconception. And whether you've had experience writing, editing, or reviewing VADs in the past, or maybe you've only heard about VADs and you're here to learn about what they are, use the chat now to share any misconceptions that you have heard about VADs. Well, I'm definitely seeing some comments coming in. Overwhelmingly, a lot of people are acknowledging that apparently the biggest misconception, at least so far, is that VADs are set in stone and can never change. Also, misconceptions that VADs can be general, that they don't have to be specific. They can be vague and kind of not very specific to a target audience. And I see there's several more coming in. Ryan, specifically focused on the one about VADs cannot be set in stone and cannot be changed. Does anything stand out to you about this misconception or ideas around it?
Yeah, I totally understand that, Eric. As someone who has written VISTA grants, written VADs, managed VISTAs, when you deal with the federal program like you all are, Eric, it can feel very official. It can feel very set in stone. It can feel very much like we've got to make sure everything is always right on par and always right up to shape all the time and not change things. So I feel that from the folks on the webinar for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see a lot more responses coming in. The VAD can only be written a certain way. Not everyone has the same requirements. VADs have other tasks as needed language, which can be a misconception in some ways. So keep these responses coming. Thank you so much.
I appreciate you all participating in that activity, and it's great to see how many of these responses really recognize what VADs are and what they are not. Functionally, misconceptions are errors or misunderstandings. So let me fill you in on what a VAD actually is. The VAD is a document that details the objectives and activities for a member's service term. It literally describes the capacity building tasks the member should be doing. We used to call it a work plan. A strong VAD is the foundation for a structured and positive member experience from recruitment to their end of service. And the VAD helps formulate personal and professional growth areas for each member. Its purpose is to guide members by acting as an outline of what they will accomplish over their year, helping them to achieve the overall project goals of the VISTA project. The VAD connects those goals to the broader impact of VISTA service, how the project will ultimately support the elimination of poverty in the community, which is what we're all working toward in VISTA. The VAD helps the member be successful, which helps the project ultimately be successful. As you heard from the misconceptions, the VAD is a changeable document that can be adapted as your project evolves. Once you've recruited a member with specific skills and experience, or as you generally learn about your members' strengths. It should not change frequently, but may need a few adjustments over time. And always remember that any changes to the VAD must be approved by your AmeriCorps regional office. VADs can also strongly support and inform your recruitment efforts. You can share all or part of the VAD with potential applicants to better inform them about what they'll be doing during their service. You'll want to use the VAD as you document member and project progress as well. It serves really as a record of project tasks. You can then determine which are complete and which ones need adaptation, and which ones will be transferred to the community and project staff. Similarly, VADs are an essential tool to reference during regular member and supervisor check-ins. And finally, VADs are a foundation for members to create a more detailed work plan that contains their service activities, professional development activities, and more. I often see VADs put into spreadsheets for some of these purposes. Eric, I'm wondering if we should poll the audience on how they use their VADs.
Ryan, that's a great idea. Exactly what I was thinking, especially because we talked about how engaging this webinar would be. So thank you so much for kicking us off with the information on the VAD definition, getting us started with its application. So you'll see a poll appear on your screen, and we'll give you maybe a half a minute to select all that apply to answer the question, how do you currently use or how have you used in the past the VISTA assignment description? And again, we know some of you may be new to the VISTA assignment description. Some may have had lots and lots of experience with it, but with the poll on the screen, you can select all that apply and you may have to click submit. You can see there's several possible answers: recruiting applicants, sharing details in interviews, orienting members, tracking member progress, guiding member one-on-one meetings, tracking VISTA project successes, guiding one-on-one meetings, planning for project continuation or sustainability, explaining the member role, and more. So there's a lot of options. There's no wrong answer, but we'll give you a few more seconds just to get a feel for who's with us today and how people use or have used the VAD. And I'll quickly say, as you can see, there's many, many uses of the VAD. This is not an exhaustive list, but a very common list of how projects have used the VISTA assignment description in the past. So we'll give you maybe 5 more seconds. I see a few more responses coming in. Thank you for those who have participated. And we'll go ahead and close the poll and very, very briefly look at the results. So overwhelmingly, the highest use of the VAD, people had 73% of tracking VISTA project success, followed closely by 70% orienting new members, and then 59% planning for project continuation or sustainability. So again, there's no wrong answer, and these results are amazing. But I also want to say that this may have given you new insight into different ways that you and your project may want to use the VAD, or maybe you never thought that you could use the VAD for transitioning between members. And I can't echo enough of what Ryan said earlier about just how important this tool, the VISTA assignment description, is, and how it impacts so many aspects of the VISTA project. So Ryan, I know you have a lot of experience working with VADs, and the background information that you shared about VADs is so important. So are you able to walk us through some of the details on how we can actually write a quality VAD? Of course, the emphasis here is on the word quality.
Yeah, absolutely, Eric. First, I'll say that you can't use a VAD for any of those applications that Eric just talked about in that poll until the VAD exists. First, you have to plan and develop the VAD. So let's talk about how to effectively write a VAD. This webinar is not intended, however, to help you write an entire VAD in less than our 1 hour together, as amazing as that would be. But we're going to show you some considerations that you can make when creating a strong VAD. Perhaps the best way to start the process of writing a quality VAD is setting aside some focused time to think about what the VAD needs to accomplish beyond providing basic instructions to the member. That may include communicating the project plans to the host organization, or framing the next year of work and its projects, or allocating member resources to different projects, outlining plans to partners, preparing materials for PR or grant applications. Lots and lots and lots of involvements there. I'm not saying that you need to or should put every aspect of those of the project into your VAD. However, a well-organized and cohesive VAD will make it much easier to plan ahead and communicate those plans. VADs must contain the following elements together. So that's member information, effective dates, sponsor and project information, the project goal, objectives, and member activities. So Eric, let's pause here once again and poll our audience to see how comfortable they are with writing these certain elements of the VAD.
Great idea, Ryan. And I will mention that although the VADs do contain all of the elements that Ryan just mentioned, for this poll, we're going to specifically focus on the parts of the VAD that involve much more careful thought and writing. So you'll see the poll appear in just a moment on your screen, and we're asking you, which part of the VAD do you feel most confident about writing? Is it the sponsor and project information, maybe the project goal, possibly the objectives, or the member activities? For this poll, you can only select one answer, even if maybe you're confident about all four and you've got the VAD down pat and you're all set and ready to go. But select one answer and click submit. We'll give you a few more seconds to respond. Again, which part of the VAD do you feel most confident about writing? And if you haven't yet written a VAD, that's okay. You may not have an answer to this poll, and that's perfectly fine. This webinar is intended to help you understand how to write a quality VAD, whether it's your first ever VAD or it's your 47th VAD. Give you about 5 more seconds to respond. Again, thank you for the responses that have come in. Okay, we will go ahead and close the poll. And based on the results, the poll shows that the part of the VAD that people feel most confident in writing is the project goal. And the part that people feel least confident in writing are the objectives, which is great because Ryan, I would like to spend some time today talking about objectives. But before we get to that, I want to mention that your task, Ryan, of course, with all of your experience, is to really help us build our confidence in learning how to write a VAD. And I know your meaningful and practical information that you have to share is ready. So I will pass it over to you to take it away.
Thanks, Eric. Let me go back to my comment earlier that every VAD contains some initial information, such as the name and position title of the member, dates, specific information about the VISTA project and sponsoring organization. Since each member gets their own VAD, this initial information gives the member context to how they and their service fit into your larger VISTA project. And because the VAD contains their name, like their actual name on it, it can help them to take more ownership of what's in the VAD and making it their mission to help accomplish it. So the project goal section should explain how the project addresses poverty and how the project activities will build capacity in the organization or in the community. When someone at your organization applied to have a VISTA project, they had to first complete a concept paper and then a project application, which both needed to have explanations of the purpose and intended outcomes of the proposed project. If you are not the person who applied for the VISTA project, which is very usual, you can work with your project director or your AmeriCorps regional office for assistance in locating the details on that project application. I suggest copying the goal statement from your project application and project plan as part of the VISTA grant into the VISTA assignment description. Cut and paste. The project goal section of the VAD helps communicate to the member what success will look like over the course of their years of service. And in the larger scope of the VISTA project's goals, the clearer you are here, the easier it will be for your member to stay aligned and focused on the project's greater goal. Now, the objective section is where you identify the bridge between the project's goals and the members' activities in the VAD. It provides a pathway and a direction as to how your project aims to achieve those goals. There is not a set number of objectives needed, and I see in the poll that was the place where folks felt least comfortable. But experience has shown that a strong VAD will have more than one objective, as well as estimated starting and ending dates for each objective. I recommend having at least one objective for each major area where the VISTA member is going to spend time. Again, the objective is critical in helping the member and, frankly, the supervisor see how the tasks that the member is performing on a day-to-day basis are linked to the larger goal of the VISTA project. Underneath each objective are member activities. These are the capacity building actions and tasks that the member will actually do to achieve the objectives, along with, again, the estimated start and end dates for each one. Those dates are really, really helpful for your VISTA members. They give members a general sense of what is expected from them, while still giving them the opportunity to determine how they will perform the activities using their own skills, experience, and knowledge, and of course, with the support from their supervisor and project staff and your VISTA leader if you have one on the project. While you can often connect many activities to a single objective, try to approach this section as realistically as you can. Consider how many activities your member will be able to finish over the course of their service year, along with the estimated amount of work involved for each activity. Plan to create a VAD that is achievable in the member's year of service and one that gives the member confidence in completing it in that time frame. It's not a laundry list of things you want to see done. The purpose is always to provide that pathway to success for the member, the project, your organization, and then, of course, ultimately the community, which underscores the importance of carving out dedicated time to carefully develop the VAD. The entire VAD, including the member activities, needs to help build the capacity of the organization to achieve its goals and eliminate poverty through empowering communities to create sustainable solutions. I know that is a lot of words, but that really sums up the four key principles of the VISTA program: build capacity, eliminate poverty, empower communities, create sustainable solutions. These concepts really help frame the focus of the VAD. We have another webinar specifically focused on capacity building, so we won't cover that concept in detail here, but stay tuned for those registration details. I do want to at least mention that as you are thinking about member activities to put into the VAD, remember that the VISTA program is all about building capacity and not direct service. Members may complete a few initial direct service tasks to get them oriented to their service in the organization. However, tasks like working directly with clients or tutoring should not be in the VAD. Those are not ultimately focused on building the capacity of the organization, of the community, and helping the organization functionally do more with what it has. In summary, the activities you include in the VAD should relate closely to the organizational, anti-poverty, and capacity building goals, like increasing reach, improving efficiency, scaling up, or being more effective in your work. This is another feature of the VAD. It helps your members stay focused on strengthening your organization's ability to meet its mission over time, long term. For both member activities and their corresponding objectives, you want to use clear, active language. It's crucial. Since members may use the VAD early on to learn more about their service, or your candidates may use that for that way, clear language will help them understand what the project entails from the start. You want to use active, strong, and specific verbs. If you're like me and you like grammar, remember those are action words, like create, analyze. And you want to avoid using more ambiguous and unclear terms like help and support that don't accurately articulate specifically what the member's going to do. With members only serving for a year, you want to empower them to perform their duties and be clear from the get-go so that they can get started right away. And that's what they want ultimately as well. A great tool to use as you build objectives is the Assess, Act, Transfer framework. Assess, Act, Transfer. Using these three different type of objectives can help you conceptualize the project through a timeline lens for your members' service year and what they'll achieve at each of those stages. So assess objectives are for the introduction stage of the project work, when your members just getting started at your organization, just trying to understand the current situation, what has been done before, and what resources are available. Members serving with first-year projects will likely need more assess objectives on their VADs than their counterparts who are more established projects. ACT objectives encompass the specific capacity building tasks we want members to do. It is the implementation piece of taking action based on what they learned from their assessments. And then lastly, the transfer objectives cover the sustainability piece of the project. How can your site use member service to initially build capacity and then set up long-term success to sustain that capacity? Although members should be documenting their steps and working towards sustainability throughout their term, members will typically accomplish transfer objectives toward the end of their service using the lessons they've learned over the full course of their year. Let's break down each one of these now, and then we'll have you put this into practice. So on the assess level, you will think about what members need to do to familiarize themselves with your organization and with the community. That's especially important if they're not coming from the community. For example, members may need to learn about the organization and the community, collect and analyze community and program data, understand the project's history and context, identify key players and their part in addressing the community issue, and learn about any existing systems or processes within the organization to try to address those issues. You may not need to incorporate all of these into the VAD, but these are just some possible things that your member may do that could guide you as you draft your objectives. Keep in mind the purpose of objectives, again, to articulate what the member will achieve during their service term. And remember that those objectives are the bridge between the project goal and the member activities. What do you want your members to achieve at this early stage? Ask yourself what would make your objectives clearer and more focused on those achievements. If your organization has hosted a member before, consider how the VAD sits within the assess level while also laying the groundwork for the next phase of the project. Asset mapping is one example of a typical assess objective for AmeriCorps VISTA members. Objectives based on the ACT level are the ones supervisors and sponsors will most likely be familiar with. They're about creating new resources or procedures. They are often the type of objectives that members really want to jump into, which is great, but it's critical that you ensure that they have first spent some of the time on the assess level of the objectives. You can't act without understanding, or you shouldn't act without understanding. It's not recommended. And you can't really effectively or respectfully do AmeriCorps service within the community within the community context if you haven't done those things. So let's say the project is focused on fundraising and resource development. In that case, as part of the ACT objectives, VISTA members might create tools. Some examples could be creating a database of potential donors, or a template for a grant application, or even a guide for branding communication materials. They'll also create processes. So members might create a training for volunteers on how to ask for donations, or a schedule for staff to meet with donors. Also, they may create systems. So systems are multiple processes strung together to create a routine flow of activity that an organization can use to get consistent results.
Ryan, this is great information, and I'm going to briefly expand on one thing you mentioned just to help differentiate these objectives from what we'll get into in a little bit on specific member activities. For example, just a minute ago, Ryan mentioned an ACT objective of create a database of potential donors. And that may seem like a specific member activity, but in this example, the project goal is increasing fundraising and resource development. The ACT objective is to explore potential new funding sources and create a tool, such as a database, to manage those funding sources. Then, which we'll get into a little bit later, specific member activities could be to research potential donors, identify a specific tool and method to track the donors, etc. So as Ryan has been demonstrating, you cannot just develop the project objective on its own. You really need to develop it in conjunction with the project goal and member activities so that the member activities add up to the objective and the objective adds up to the goal. This is a great time for us to have you practice working with the assess and act stages.
I agree, Eric. Let's start at the top. On the screen is part of a sample VAD. We've also posted this information in the chat if it's easier to use and see. This sample project's goal is to implement new after-school programs aimed at students from underserved populations. So we're going to use this example as the basis for a couple of chat activities.
Thanks, Ryan. We do want to give you a good amount of time to practice what we mean when we say writing an objective, especially since in our earlier poll, that was the part of the VAD where people felt the least confident in writing. And in this activity, we're going to be having you writing an objective with the assess, act, transfer framework that Ryan just introduced. So here, the goal of the VISTA project is, in this example, the project will implement new sports-based after-school programming for students from underserved populations. So we're going to give you a little bit of extra time to think about and draft either an assess objective or an act objective based on this project goal and what Ryan just shared with us a minute ago. We're going to put on some music and give you a couple of minutes again to think about the project goal that's on the screen, and it's also in the chat, and draft an objective, and then we'll come back and discuss a few of them with you. Okay, great work. I'm seeing a lot of responses coming in, and I'll point out one or two specifically. But again, we're looking at the project goal that will implement new sports-based after-school programming for students from underserved populations. And we asked you to create an assess or an act objective, and looks like many people are on the right track. I see, Ryan, a couple of examples like assess current programs and the sports students may be interested in, which really focuses on an objective of doing an inventory of what other sports-based programs are out there, and also perhaps trying to find out what sports students are interested in that could pertain to the program. That's a very good objective, the way it's written and how it leads directly up to the project goal. I also see a few that look more like specific member activities, which is still good. We'll be getting there in just a few minutes. But quite a few of them focus on evaluating or assessing the community needs or the student's interest, really looking at the existing infrastructure around the project and related to the project. Ryan, based on these assess and act objectives, what is your assessment or action item? See what I did there regarding these responses?
Oh boy, Eric, the dad jokes. These are great. These are really great examples. Like you said, we've got some examples of activities that we'll talk about in just a moment. But these help understand, help communicate to a VISTA member what the larger objectives are that will lead to the successful goal, which is the project will implement new sports-based after-school programming for students from underserved populations. So I often see these in a flow chart, right? The project goal leads down to the objectives, leads down to the member activities, and those things are all connected. So I think these are really great examples.
And hopefully, as you're skimming through the chat, as more responses are coming in, you can see how clearly some of them are written, such as assess the student interest based on their needs. Some of them are very succinct, but also articulate the goal. And I will say, of course, there are many possibilities for an assess or an act objective. One example that we came up with was very similar to one that I'm seeing in the chat, was around exploring the after-school programming that's currently available in the community. That way it leads up to the goal of implementing sports-based after-school programming. An example of an ACT objective, on the other hand, may be something like create a training curriculum for volunteers. So this is great work. I know many people said they didn't feel that confident about writing objectives, but this is a really, really strong start. So I'm very happy to see this. So let's take what we've learned so far and go a step further as we look at objectives. Based on the previous project goal, Ryan and I have drafted a partial objective. So now that you've gotten some practice writing an objective, we want you to focus on how you can improve existing objectives, especially because you may be in a project where the objectives are already written, but maybe they need to be enhanced or updated or adapted. So we're asking, how would you strengthen this draft project objective? Identify the needs of students in the community. Again, we know that this kind of work takes time. In the context of a webinar, we have a couple of minutes, but when you're actually doing this on your own, you'll take a lot more time to really reflect on this. But we'll give you a couple minutes to think again about the project goal and the draft parcel objective that we posted in the chat, and then respond in the chat with what you would do to change this objective to make it stronger. Okay. Thank you for responding and articulating what you do to make this parcel objective stronger. And quick summary, I'll say one of the really great things I'm seeing in the chat is people are getting the hang of what we're looking at. This objective is good as a base, but it's a little bit vague. And a lot of the responses I'm seeing in the chat, Ryan, are very adding more specificity, such as changing the objective to say something like identify the needs of students in the community by assessing survey responses from educational leaders, students, and parents. Obviously, it doesn't have to be worded in that exact phrase, as many people are coming up with different variations, but it speaks to the specificity of making sure that the objective still relates to the project goal and it has enough room to have specific member activities beneath it, but it does add some specificity to the objective. I see help the students identify their needs, which is another way of phrasing it and getting a little bit more specific of putting a little bit more ownership on the students to help them also articulate their needs. Ryan, what are you noticing or what are you seeing in the chat?
Yeah, I think you've hit it right on the head, Eric. The keywords for me are clarity, specificity, directness. Just as if I walked up to any of you and handed you some instructions to do something that maybe you have not done, or maybe in a community you have not worked in, or maybe in an organization you're unfamiliar with, what you would want from me is that clarity, specificity, and directness so you could be successful in that service. That's what your VISTA members want as well. Put your vision into words. Leave them some room to be creative, use their skills, their experience, to dream a little, to do that service alongside you, but be really clear about what you are wanting as an outcome.
Ryan, I'm so glad you mentioned the word clarity because when we were looking at this, one of the ways that we thought to strengthen this would be to look for what's missing or what's not very clear in this partial objective. So for example, we'll highlight that the word needs can be somewhat ambiguous because this specific partial objective does not really help the VISTA member know if they're looking for student needs related to education, maybe programming, skills, etc. Simply changing it to identify the programming needs of students in the community gives it a little bit more clarity and specificity and better connects it to the project goal. And I'll mention another way that you could improve the objective, in addition to many of the items we've seen in the chat, is to frame it as an exploration of what is working for students involved in other types of after-school programming. The member activities will get into the fine details and the specificity, but the objective should also be directly related to the project goal. So you could rewrite the objective as identify the programming needs of low-income students in the community, or evaluate the successes and challenges of other similar after-school programs. So we've covered a lot of detail under the Assess and Act framework, and Ryan will now talk a little bit about how you can incorporate transfer objectives into your VADs when focusing on ways to continue and sustain the work.
Thanks, Eric. Sustainability is so important for the work of VISTA projects, and clear VADs play a major role in that process. Let me share some information about those transfer level objectives. It's probably no surprise to you that the transfer objectives help embed the member service into the organization and the community to lead to lasting impacts beyond a member service. They keep the focus on continuing important elements of the the project from member to member and ultimately towards sustainability when the VISTA project ends and the organization and community have transitioned into fully taking on the tasks. Remember that VISTAs are temporary resources. Part of their role is to ensure their work continues without future VISTA support. So I like to think of VISTA member service as sort of a group of balloons, if you picture that in your hand. The member creates the balloons, blows the balloons up, fills them with helium, carries the balloons with them throughout their term of service. And then how do we tie those balloons down in the organization or the community so the member doesn't carry them away once their service ends? So to draft a transfer objective, think about the knowledge or the products or the relationships that members will cultivate in relation to the overall project goal. So, for the transfer of knowledge, ask yourself who will receive the knowledge the member has collected? What actions will that person or organization take to use the knowledge and continue working toward the project goal? We don't want that knowledge to walk out the door. For the transfer of products, think about which products the member will leave behind for the organization or community to use. What instructions or manuals exist to ensure those products continue to be helpful? Use products to think about things like curriculum or technical tools, spreadsheets, things that the Vista has created that are sort of tangible. And then lastly, for the transfer of relationships, how can volunteers, partners, donors recruited by the member remain connected to the organization? You obviously don't want those to leave with the VISTA member either. The answer to these questions will get you to the how of writing the transfer objective. We won't have you practice writing this type of objective today, but Eric, let's continue with a critical and likely very much focused on section of the VAD, the member activities.
Absolutely. And I know in our earlier poll, this was an area that people felt a little bit more confident in writing, so we'll give you a little bit less time. But in the chat, we're going to post a reminder about our example project goal, which is the project will implement new sports-based after-school programming for students from underserved populations, and our enhanced draft objective, which is identify the identify the programming needs of low-income students in the community. So we'll have you take a look at those and take a moment to think about one specific member activity that would add up to the objective, which adds up to the goal. Again, you can type your response in the chat, making sure to send your message to everyone. And again, we're looking for you to just include one specific member activity that adds up to the objective and the goal. Great work, great work. And this is my personal favorite part of the VAD because I'm a detailed thinker. So the very specific member activities I love, whereas it's much more difficult for me to think about objectives similar to you. But I'll read a few which are directly related to the project objective, which is perfect. One is create a survey or assessment tool. That's a very specific member activity. And of course, you can add more detail to that, but it specifically adds up to identifying the programming needs of low-income students by creating a survey or assessment tool to see what information you already have or what information you'd like to know. Another one is host a vision meeting with the community leaders, teachers, and parent volunteers, as well as identify the programming needs of the low-income students in the community. Hosting a meeting is a very specific activity that's easily achievable for VISTA members. Create surveys, a lot of comments on creating surveys. Explore community transportation for anticipating students to see how students could potentially get to the programming if it's in one physical location. Urban greening project in the city and looking at specifically how citizens could get involved in that. So these are really good activities that are very specific And again, as Ryan mentioned, it's important as we look at all these, how they're in alignment with, but also add up to the project objective and the project goal so that the VAD is all in alignment and together. Ryan, does anything stand out to you specifically?
Yeah, I think folks are really on the right track here. And remember, these are the things that, in my mind, take the least amount of explanation to your VISTA members or potential VISTA members. They're pretty clear cut, right? Create a survey, host a meeting. Those tell you exactly what you're going to do. And they can be very, very specific. So something like, for this project objective, maybe it's identify athletic opportunities in the community for students with different abilities. Maybe that's the gap that your organization will fill. Perhaps that's not needed because you identify them and there's enough. So remember, they can be pretty darn specific as well, as long as they lead up to that main objective. And again, you're not telling the VISTA member how to do it here, right? This isn't a full project plan. It is an activity, right? An activity that leads up to the objective, that leads up to the goal. They can then use their talents, their skills, their experience to figure out how to actually implement them.
And as Ryan mentioned earlier, although we knew it would not be possible to write an entire VAD in the context of a webinar, hopefully these activities at least showed you how to reflect on and implement these steps, and then start putting them into practice when writing a quality and well-written VAD. We know that it really should take time to create a good VAD, and let me tell you, it is well worth it. I can tell you from my experience and from what I've heard. And once you have the VAD created, you'll definitely want to make sure to review it. So Ryan, speaking of review and just all that we've covered, what recommendations do you have for writing a quality VAD?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Number one, my best advice is to carve out that time to focus and think about writing goals, objectives, and activities. We've mentioned it before. You need some clarity, some focus to be able to write these. I have quite a few other recommendations, and I'm going to highlight some of the key ones here as we wind down the webinar. The webinar is about writing VADs, and I also want to take note that again, taking that time to review the VAD once you've written it is equally as important as the initial writing of the VAD. It's an opportunity to really explore and plan for the position and determine if it needs any changes to ensure it fits with the project goal ultimately. I recommend having the member's supervisor review and provide feedback if you are not the supervisor when you're writing this. Make sure that they have, or at least are oriented to, the plan for the member position, and then guide them through the VAD to assess clarity and content, especially because they're going to be directly supervising that member. I suggest that you seek maybe someone outside the project, someone brand new to the project, as well as someone not familiar with the organization or service to carefully read the VAD and see if they understand both the project focus and the member activities. Since many members are unfamiliar with your project, this practice will let you know if the VAD is clear and makes sense to a newcomer. I use my spouse for this particular task. Also, you really want to be clear about what kind of feedback you want when you ask that from folks and how you'd like to receive it so that it's easier for you to then review and incorporate those changes as needed. Know that regardless of the feedback you receive or who reviews it, it is the responsibility ultimately of the project director, though your project may use a different title for that person who oversees the entire project, to make adjustments and submit the VAD to the AmeriCorps regional office for approval. One situation where reviewing the VAD is especially important is if there's a gap in time between your original drafting of the VAD and when you recruit and onboard a member. In some cases, this could be weeks or months, and a lot can change in our work in that time. So you'll want to make sure you review the VAD for any updates, projects, organizational updates before the member's first day of service. Here are some of my overall secrets to success when it comes to writing VADs. First, sequence VAD activities so the more challenging ones are toward the end of service. This gives members an opportunity to learn and grow and sort of warm up before taking on the hardest efforts. I like to draft VADs in a word processing document for easier editing and record keeping. You can then cut and paste the content once you're ready into the final online template. As I've mentioned before, having at least one other person offer feedback on your VAD before submission is critical. When you get deep into these documents, or at least this is the true for me, it's really easy to miss simple mistakes and oversights. Definitely be aware of those character limits or other restrictions when you're creating and submitting your VADs in the online system. We've all made those mistakes and been really frustrated by it. Make sure there's a clear connection between the project goal, the objectives, and the member activities. Again, those things must be in alignment. If they're misaligned, you can expect your member service to also be misaligned. And finally, remember to build in extra time into your VAD writing process, since both the original VAD submission and any changes along the way require AmeriCorps Regional Office approval. Let's do a quick check of your knowledge and understanding before we wrap up.
So we have one more poll for you. I'll read a very short scenario, and then we'll ask you to answer the question when the poll appears on the screen. So here's the scenario. Rose is a project director at a project whose goal is to eliminate poverty by expanding access to adult education in her community. She is creating VADs and needs help with objectives. And we did also post that in the chat so you can see it. The question that you'll see in the poll is which option below would be an objective that aligns with the project goal? So think about all we've discussed around project's goals and objectives and select which one you think would be an objective that aligns with this project goal. We'll give you a minute or so to respond. Seeing some responses coming in, so we'll give you another 20 or 30 seconds. Thank you for those who've responded already. And again, you can only select one response. Which option is an objective that aligns with the project goal? Okay, about 5 more seconds for the last few responses I see that are coming in. And we will go ahead and close the poll, and we'll take a look at the correct answer. So in this scenario, the response that aligns the most with the project goal is A, explore existing adult education opportunities. As we practiced earlier in the session, the objective is specific enough that it adds up to the goal and general enough that it leaves room for specific member activities that add up to the objective. Answer choices B and D are more like specific member activities, and answer choice C could be useful at some point, but focuses on children while the project goal is about adult education. So thank you very much for participating. We have one last chat activity for you. So in a minute, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan for some final recommendations for further study on this topic, but I do want to ask, what are your secrets to success in writing VADs? You can feel free to type it in the chat. If you have links to resources or other things you'd like to share with other participants, please post them in the chat. As I pass it over to Ryan to talk about some very useful resources to help in writing quality VADs.
Thanks for those secrets. I'll be sure to jot them down for myself as well. Remember to connect with others to learn more about the practices you can borrow for writing great VADs. Let's talk about further study. These resources will help you get started or strengthen your practice the next time you write a VAD. First, I'd like to suggest the VISTA Assignment Description Training Manual from VISTA. And that's mostly for VISTA sponsors to give you more foundational information as you write VADs. My second recommendation is a handout on creating an effective VISTA assignment description. And then there's the VAD checklist and tip sheet to guide you in this process. The last resource is the AmeriCorps VISTA project application instructions, which goes beyond the VAD, but gives you a framework and some details. Love the session today. What a great session. What great interaction. Thank you all for your participation. Keep up the great work on your VADs and your commitment to service and alleviating poverty.
Thank you so much, Ryan. This has been extremely helpful. And connected to that, I do want to ask our audience for their input. So if you have a minute now or right after the webinar, please take a moment just to complete the end of course evaluation. Only takes 2 to 3 minutes. You'll see a link in the chat. Again, thank you so much for your feedback. We review it and we appreciate it. I do also want to direct your attention to next month's webinar, specifically designed for sponsors and leaders in the VISTA program. It'll be on Thursday, March 20th, 1 month from today, 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern, hosted by my amazing colleague, Andy King, on the topic of crafting compelling service opportunity listings, especially if you're in or soon will be in the recruitment phase and really want to get that information out there. You'll see a link to register in the chat. You'll also receive an invitation in your inbox, and you can always see what's coming up by visiting the calendar on the VISTA campus. Lastly, I just want to point out one of many new online courses that are available in case you haven't seen them. This one is focused on a new learning path called the Project Coordinator role. There's various learning paths and online courses available, but this one's specifically designed for members who are in the role of project coordinator as they develop, organize, and implement a plan for completing their VISTA assignment. There's 2 e-learning modules that provide a foundation for coordinating project activities. So if you have a minute, take time to go into the VISTA campus, look at this and several of the other online learning courses. They are specifically for you to enhance your great work. So I want to thank you and thank our presenter, Ryan Fewens-Bliss, for facilitating this session. I want to thank our instructional design team, Vanessa Francis, Elizabeth Floyd, Julia Rensel, Cameron Greenup, my colleague, Andy King, as well as our session producers, Steve Gray and Tessa Marshall. And most of all, thank you for participating. Great to have you. This concludes our webinar. Thank you so much for joining.